Arjun had been awake for what felt like forever. The journey from Bangalore to Manali had taken 18 long hours. First, there was a delayed flight. Then a bumpy bus ride through winding mountain roads that made his stomach turn. By the time he finally reached the resort, his eyes were burning with exhaustion, and every muscle in his body ached. All he wanted was to fall into bed and forget the world existed. The resort looked beautiful even in his tired state. It was one of those fancy places with wooden architecture and big windows that showed off the mountains. His company had booked it for their annual retreat, something about team building and bonding. Honestly, Arjun couldn't care less about any of that right now. He just needed sleep. The front desk lady handed him his room key with a bright smile and rattled off information about breakfast timings and meeting schedules. But he barely heard any of it. His brain had checked out hours ago. When he reached his room on the 3rd floor, he didn't even bother turning on all the lights. He kicked off his shoes near the door, dropped his bag somewhere in the corner, and stumbled toward the bed. The room was nice, he noticed vaguely. Big, comfortable bed, clean sheets, curtains already drawn. Perfect. He didn't even change out of his jeans and t-shirt. He just fell face first onto the mattress and felt consciousness slipping away within seconds. The pillow was soft. The blanket was warm. And finally he could rest. Sleep came fast and heavy, the kind that pulls you down deep where you don't dream, don't move, don't think. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. The world outside continued, but inside that room, Arjun was completely gone to it all. His phone buzzed a few times on the nightstand, but he didn't hear it. Someone knocked on a nearby door down the hall, but the sound didn't reach him. He was in that deep, peaceful sleep that your body desperately needs after pushing too hard for too long. Then, somewhere around midnight, something changed. In his sleep-fogged mind, he heard a sound, the click of a door opening. His brain tried to make sense of it but couldn't quite manage. Maybe it was housekeeping, but it was the middle of the night. Maybe he was dreaming. The sound of wheels rolling on carpet reached his ears. A suitcase, perhaps? His mind swam through confusion, trying to surface from the depths of sleep but not quite making it. Then he heard a voice. A woman's voice. Clear and confident. Speaking as if she was talking to herself, or maybe on the phone. The words cut through his foggy awareness like a knife. She said something about one bed being enough and being too tired to argue with the front desk. Wait. What? Arjun's eyes shot open. His heart suddenly pounding. He lay very still, trying to understand what was happening. Through his half-open eyes, he could make out a figure moving around his room. A woman. She had a rolling suitcase and was setting it down near the wall like she owned the place. His mind raced. Was this a dream? Had he somehow wandered into the wrong room? No, impossible. He remembered clearly checking in, the lady at the desk giving him this room number, his key working in the lock. So who was this woman, and why was she in his room acting like everything was normal? He wanted to speak, to ask what was going on. But his voice seemed stuck in his throat. The shock had frozen him in place. The woman moved around with purpose, completely unaware that he was watching her. She took something from her bag and walked toward the bathroom. A moment later, he heard the door close and lock, and then the sound of running water. She was taking a shower. In his bathroom, in his room, this was actually happening and it wasn't a dream. Arjun sat up slowly, his heart still racing. He rubbed his eyes, hoping maybe his vision would clear, and the woman would disappear, proving this was all some weird exhaustion-induced hallucination. But no, her suitcase was still there by the wall. Her jacket was draped over the chair. This was real. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand, the bright screen making him squint. Multiple messages from his colleague Vikram lit up the screen. He opened them with shaking fingers. The messages made his stomach drop. There had been a mix-up with the room bookings. The resort had overbooked somehow, and some people were going to have to share rooms. Vikram was asking if anyone had experienced any issues. Oh, Arjun had issues all right. A complete stranger was currently showering in his bathroom, apparently planning to spend the night in his room. This couldn't be happening. Not after the day he'd had. Not when all he wanted was some peace and quiet and a good night's sleep. The shower stopped. His anxiety spiked immediately. What was he supposed to do? What was he supposed to say? Should he run to the front desk? But he was in his rumpled travel clothes, half asleep, and it was midnight. Should he just confront her when she came out? Say what exactly? His mind spun with options. None of them good. He heard the bathroom door handle turn, and he tensed up completely, having no idea what would happen next. Steam rolled out from the bathroom as the door opened, bringing with it the smell of soap and shampoo. The woman stepped out wearing comfortable cotton pajamas, her hair wet and wrapped in a towel. She was busy drying her hair with another towel, and didn't look up immediately. Arjun just sat there on the bed, frozen, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. Then she glanced up and stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide when she saw him sitting there, very much awake and very much present. For what felt like a full minute, nobody said anything. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Arjun could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then, instead of screaming or running or doing any of the things he expected, she just shrugged slightly and said something that made his brain short-circuit. She said she thought maybe he'd gone to the bar or something, like it was the most natural assumption in the world. Arjun finally found his voice, though it came out rough and scratchy from sleep. He told her this was his room. He'd checked in hours ago. He'd been sleeping until she walked in. The woman didn't seem particularly bothered by this information. She let out a long sigh and simply sat down on the edge of the bed like they were old friends having a normal conversation. The casualness of it was both frustrating and somehow calming at the same time. She introduced herself as Mira. She explained she was with the marketing team from the Mumbai office. She'd arrived late too, and when she went to the front desk, they'd given her this room key and told her everything was sorted out. She looked at Arjun with curious eyes and asked if he was from the tech department. Her tone was so matter-of-fact, so unbothered by the strangeness of the situation, that Arjun almost wanted to laugh. Almost. He nodded slowly and introduced himself as Arjun from the Bangalore office. But none of this made sense, he insisted. Why would the resort staff put two complete strangers in the same room? Mira pulled out her phone and showed him her booking confirmation. There it was, the same room number as his. She scrolled through her emails, showing him the entire conversation with the company's travel coordinator. Everything looked official and proper, except for the obvious problem that they both had the same room. Mira put her phone away and looked at him with practical eyes. She pointed out it was past midnight, and the front desk probably only had 1 or 2 tired employees working. She was exhausted from traveling, and from the looks of it, so was he. The bed was huge, big enough for 3 people, honestly. They were both adults and professionals. Couldn't they just survive one night and sort this mess out properly in the morning when everyone was awake and functional? Arjun wanted to argue. He wanted to insist this wasn't appropriate or proper or any number of things his tired brain was trying to tell him. But she had a point. He was so exhausted he could barely think straight. The idea of going back down to the lobby, arguing with staff, possibly having to move rooms or wait while they figured things out, all sounded impossibly difficult right now. And Mira seemed completely trustworthy. She wasn't acting weird or making him uncomfortable beyond the basic strangeness of the situation itself. Fine, he finally said. But with one condition. He was putting pillows down the middle of the bed, a proper barrier. Mira actually laughed at that. A genuine warm sound that cut through the tension in the room. She said it was very noble of him, very old-fashioned. But she didn't object. She even helped him grab the big decorative pillows from the small sofa near the window. They arranged them in a neat line right down the center of the bed, creating 2 separate territories. They settled on opposite sides, both being very careful to stay on their own half. Arjun lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every tiny sound. He could hear Mira breathing on the other side of the pillow wall. He could hear the slight rustle of sheets when she adjusted her position. He could hear a clock ticking somewhere in the room that he'd never noticed before. Sleep, which had come so easily before, now seemed impossible to find. His mind wouldn't shut off, too busy processing the absurdity of the situation. Apparently, Mira was having the same problem. After several minutes of silence, she whispered into the darkness, asking if this was weird. Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable, completely different from her confident tone earlier. Despite everything, despite the strangeness and confusion and exhaustion, Arjun found himself smiling. He whispered back that yes, this was incredibly weird. Mira made a small sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. At least they were in agreement about that much. More silence followed, but somehow it felt less uncomfortable now. They'd acknowledged the elephant in the room, literally and figuratively. Arjun's eyes started to get heavy again. The exhaustion was winning over the awkwardness. He heard Mira's breathing become slower and more even. She was falling asleep, and gradually, finally, so was he. His last conscious thought was wondering how on earth he'd explain this to anyone if they found out. Then sleep claimed him once more, and the strange, impossible night faded into dreams. Morning light crept through the gaps in the curtains, gentle and warm. Arjun woke slowly, his mind foggy and confused. Something felt different. He opened his eyes and immediately understood why. The careful pillow barrier they'd constructed had completely collapsed during the night. Pillows were scattered everywhere. One was on the floor. Two were bunched up near the footboard. And worse, much worse, Mira had sprawled across more than half the bed. She was lying on her stomach now, one arm stretched out where the pillow wall used to be, almost touching his shoulder. Her hair had dried overnight and was spread across her pillow in dark waves. She was still deeply asleep, breathing peacefully, completely unaware that she'd invaded his territory. Arjun's first instinct was panic. But then he realized nothing inappropriate had happened. They'd just been two exhausted people sleeping, and sleep doesn't follow rules or respect pillow boundaries. He carefully slid out of bed, moving slowly so he wouldn't wake her. He grabbed his toiletry bag and some clean clothes and escaped to the bathroom. Under the hot shower, he tried to make sense of everything. Yesterday felt like a fever dream. Had he really spent the night sharing a bed with a complete stranger? A colleague he'd never met before? This was going to be so awkward to explain if anyone found out. He took his time getting ready, brushing his teeth twice, combing his hair carefully, basically doing anything to delay going back into that room. When he finally emerged, Mira was awake. She was sitting on the edge of the bed looking genuinely embarrassed, which was somehow reassuring after her complete confidence last night. She apologized immediately, saying she was apparently a chaotic sleeper. She'd knocked down the pillows. She hoped she hadn't made him uncomfortable. She was already gathering her things, shoving them quickly into her bag, saying she'd go straight to the front desk and get this sorted out right away. Breakfast was being served in the main dining hall, a huge room with floor-to-ceiling windows showing off the mountain views. Arjun loaded his plate with parathas and eggs, trying to act normal, but his mind was still spinning. Then he saw the resort manager approaching, and his stomach tightened. The manager came right to where Mira was sitting a few tables away and started talking to her. Arjun moved closer to hear what was happening. The manager looked genuinely apologetic. He explained there had been a computer system error. Several rooms had been accidentally booked twice. The resort was completely full because 3 different companies had scheduled retreats for the same weekend. Every single room was occupied. The nearest hotel with availability was 2 hours away down the mountain. They could arrange transportation if needed, but it would mean missing the morning sessions that both their teams were required to attend. Arjun and Mira looked at each other across the dining hall. Both their team leaders were already waving them over to different tables where their departments were gathering. The day's schedule was packed with presentations and team activities. Missing even the morning would look bad, especially since this retreat was supposed to be mandatory. Mira walked over to where Arjun was standing and spoke quietly so others wouldn't hear. She pointed out they'd already survived one night. If they had to do this for 2 more nights until some people checked out early, they could manage it. Unless he was really uncomfortable with the arrangement, Arjun surprised himself by agreeing. Maybe it was the practical side of him that didn't want to waste 4 hours driving down and back up the mountain. Maybe it was the fact that Mira had been completely respectful despite the chaos. Maybe he was just too tired to fight it. Whatever the reason, he told her it was fine, but they definitely needed some ground rules this time. No more flying blind. They found a quiet corner near the coffee station and quickly worked out a system. Lights out by 11 at night. No exceptions. Morning bathroom schedule so nobody was waiting around awkwardly. The pillow barrier would stay, and they'd actually respect it this time. And most importantly, they absolutely could not tell anyone from their offices about this. The last thing either of them needed was becoming office gossip. They could already imagine the rumors and jokes and awkward questions. The morning session was all about team-building exercises. Arjun tried to focus on the presentations about company values and growth strategies. But his mind kept wandering. Across the room, he could see Mira sitting with her marketing team, looking completely professional and engaged. It was strange knowing they'd shared a bed last night, while none of these people had any idea. The secret felt heavy and weird. Then came the afternoon activity, and fate decided to have some fun. The facilitator announced they'd be doing trust exercises in randomly assigned pairs. Names were drawn from a box. When the facilitator called out Arjun's name, and then Mira's name right after, they both froze. Of all the 50 people at this retreat, they'd been paired together. Some of their colleagues chuckled, having no idea about the irony. Mira caught his eye and shrugged, a small smile on her face. What else could they do but go with it? The trust fall exercise required one person to fall backward, while their partner caught them. Mira went first. She stood with her back to Arjun, arms crossed over her chest. The facilitator told her to fall whenever she was ready. She hesitated for just a moment, then let herself drop. Arjun caught her easily, his hands steady under her shoulders. But when their eyes met in that moment, something shifted. The annoyance and awkwardness from last night seemed to dissolve. Instead, there was something else. Recognition maybe. Curiosity, definitely. A sense that maybe this strange situation wasn't entirely terrible. That evening, walking back to their shared room felt completely different from the night before. The awkwardness had faded into something more comfortable. They weren't exactly friends yet, but they weren't strangers anymore either. Mira got to the bathroom first for her shower, and Arjun used the time to check his work emails and scroll through his phone. When she came out, he took his turn without any of the previous tension. When he emerged, Mira was sitting on her side of the bed, which they'd already started thinking of as having sides now. Looking at her laptop, she glanced up and asked if he wanted to watch something on TV, or if the light would bother him. Arjun said the light was fine. He wasn't particularly sleepy yet anyway. Somehow that simple exchange led to an actual conversation. Mira closed her laptop and asked what he thought of the retreat so far. Arjun admitted he usually found these company events pretty boring, just going through the motions. But today had been different. The trust exercise had actually been meaningful, especially since he'd been paired with her of all people. Mira laughed and agreed. She said usually these retreats were all forced fun and fake enthusiasm. But there was something about being in the mountains that made it feel more real. The conversation flowed naturally from there. They talked about work first. Mira was leading a new marketing campaign for one of the company's biggest product launches. She was passionate about it. You could hear it in her voice when she described her vision. But she also admitted the pressure was intense. She was the only woman heading a major campaign in her department, and she constantly felt like she had to prove herself twice as hard as her male colleagues. Every mistake felt magnified. Every success felt like it was scrutinized more carefully. Arjun found himself opening up too. He told her about his frustrations with being stuck in the same role for 3 years. He had ideas, creative solutions to problems. But his department was so structured and hierarchical that nobody seemed interested in hearing from someone at his level. He'd thought about trying to switch to a different department, maybe something that combined tech with creative work, but the fear of starting over kept stopping him. Mira looked at him thoughtfully and asked why he didn't just apply for the internal mobility program their company had. She knew several people who'd successfully switched departments that way. Arjun had considered it, he admitted, but fear held him back. The fear of failing, of not being good enough, of leaving something secure for something uncertain. Starting over at this point in his career felt impossible. Mira's response was immediate and fierce. She told him that was nonsense. He was what, 28? 29? That wasn't even remotely too late for anything. People changed careers entirely in their 40s and 50s. He was being scared of a challenge that he was absolutely capable of meeting. Her conviction surprised him. She barely knew him, yet she seemed certain he could do this. When was the last time someone had that much faith in him? When was the last time he'd had that much faith in himself? The conversation shifted to lighter things after that. Favorite movies and embarrassing college stories. Books they'd read, and places they wanted to travel. Mira had a sharp sense of humor that caught him off guard multiple times, making him laugh out loud. She told him about her disastrous attempt at learning guitar, which had ended with her somehow breaking 2 strings in one practice session. He told her about the time he'd accidentally sent a complaint email about his manager to that very manager instead of his friend. Hours passed without either of them noticing. At some point, Mira yawned and checked her phone. It was past 1 in the morning. They both blinked in surprise. Where had the time gone? They should probably sleep since tomorrow was another full day of activities. They settled into their respective sides of the bed. The pillow barrier still there, but feeling more like a formality now than an actual necessity. Arjun turned off the lights, and they both lay there in the comfortable darkness. Just as he was drifting off, Mira spoke softly. She thanked him for the conversation. She said she hadn't talked to someone like that in a long time. Just honest and real, without any workplace politics or pretending. Arjun smiled in the darkness and told her he felt the same way. There was something freeing about talking to someone from a different department, someone who had no stake in his career or judgments about his choices. They said goodnight, and this time, sleep came easily to both of them. The strangeness of the situation had transformed into something unexpectedly pleasant. The next morning brought the 3rd day of the retreat. They'd fallen into an easy routine now. Mira showered first, while Arjun checked his messages. Then they switched. They walked down to breakfast together, chatting easily, before splitting off to join their respective teams. To any observer, they just looked like colleagues who'd become friendly during the retreat. Nobody had any idea about their unusual sleeping arrangements. And that secret felt less burdensome now. It was just something that had happened, something they were handling like adults. The day's main event was a group presentation challenge. Teams of 6 would work together to create a marketing strategy for a fictional product. Then present it to everyone. The teams were being announced, and Arjun listened half-heartedly until he heard his name called for Team 3. Then the facilitator called out 5 more names, and the last one was Mira. Of course it was. The universe was clearly having fun with this situation. They caught each other's eyes across the room and shared a look that said they were both thinking the same thing. But working together turned out to be incredible. Mira's marketing expertise combined perfectly with Arjun's technical knowledge and creative ideas. While the other team members contributed good thoughts, Mira and Arjun found themselves leading the direction almost naturally. They seemed to communicate in shorthand now, understanding each other's points before they were fully explained. When Mira suggested a social media angle, Arjun immediately knew how to frame the technical backend to support it. When Arjun proposed an innovative app feature, Mira instantly saw how to market it to different audiences. Their presentation won the challenge. The judges praised the seamless integration of creative vision and practical execution. Their teammates were thrilled, high-fiving and celebrating. But what stuck with Arjun was the moment during the presentation when he and Mira had both reached for the same marker to point at the board. Their hands had brushed for just a second. It was nothing really, completely innocent. But the brief contact had sent an unexpected jolt through him. From the way Mira had quickly pulled her hand back, he wondered if she'd felt it too. The final evening of the retreat arrived with a strange mix of relief and something Arjun couldn't quite name. Relief that the event was almost over, but also an unexpected reluctance for it to end. He and Mira would go back to their separate offices in different cities after tomorrow. They'd probably never see each other again. Or maybe just awkwardly wave at each other during company-wide video calls. The thought bothered him more than it should. After dinner, Mira suggested they take a walk through the resort gardens. The mountain air was crisp and clean, cool without being cold. They wandered along the lit pathways, passing other retreat attendees in small groups, all winding down from the busy days. The resort had beautiful landscaping, with flower beds and small trees and stone benches positioned at scenic spots. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the peaceful evening. Eventually, they reached a wooden railing at the edge of the property that overlooked the valley below. City lights twinkled far in the distance, tiny and beautiful against the darkness. Mira leaned against the railing and was quiet for a moment before speaking. She said these had been the strangest 3 days of her life. When she'd first walked into that room and realized there was a mix-up, she'd been angry and frustrated. But now, standing here, she wondered if it hadn't been a mix-up at all. Maybe it was exactly what both of them needed to happen. Arjun stood next to her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. He admitted he'd been thinking the same thing. He'd come to this retreat dreading another boring corporate event, going through the motions, counting down the hours until he could go home. Instead, he'd met someone who actually saw him, someone who challenged his thinking and made him reconsider choices he'd accepted as permanent. Someone who made him want to take risks again. Mira turned to face him, and in the soft garden lighting, her expression was open and vulnerable. She pointed out the obvious problem. They lived in different cities. Mumbai and Bangalore weren't exactly next door to each other. The practical reality of their situations hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Long-distance relationships were difficult. Maybe it was better to just appreciate these 3 days for what they were and leave it at that. But Arjun didn't want to leave it at that. Mumbai to Bangalore was just a short flight, he said. 2 hours in the air. People managed longer distances than that all the time. And she'd told him herself just 2 nights ago that he needed to take more risks. Step outside his comfort zone. Well, this terrified him, this feeling. But maybe that meant it was worth pursuing. Maybe the things that scare us most are the ones we need most. Mira studied his face carefully, and Arjun could see her processing everything. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face. She asked if he was really saying what she thought he was saying. He nodded, his heart pounding. He was saying that he wanted to try. He wanted to see where this could go. These 3 strange days had meant something. She meant something to him. Walking away and pretending otherwise would be the biggest regret of his life. The kiss happened naturally, like it was inevitable. Like they'd been moving toward this moment since that first awkward night. It was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as they both gave in to what they'd been carefully not acknowledging. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Mira laughed softly and said she couldn't believe she was doing this. She never got involved with colleagues. She'd always kept her professional and personal lives completely separate. But apparently, all her rules went out the window when it came to him. They walked back to the room hand in hand, no longer caring if anyone saw them. Let people wonder. Let them gossip if they wanted. Tomorrow they'd go back to their normal lives. But tonight, they had each other and the certainty that some accidents are actually destiny wearing a disguise. That night, the pillow barrier stayed on the floor where it had fallen the first night. They fell asleep talking, sharing dreams and plans, their voices getting quieter as exhaustion won. But this time, the space between them had disappeared, not with awkwardness or hesitation, but with a rightness that felt like coming home. The next morning, checkout was bittersweet. They packed their bags slowly, neither wanting to rush the moment. The resort lobby was chaos, with all 3 companies checking out around the same time. Colleagues rushed around exchanging contact information and saying goodbye. In the middle of all that noise and movement, Arjun and Mira stood together with their luggage, holding hands like they were the only calm point in a storm. Mira asked the question that had been hanging between them since last night. This wasn't just a retreat thing, right? They were really going to try? Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed vulnerability. Arjun pulled out his phone and showed her his screen. He'd already looked up weekend flights from Bangalore to Mumbai. He'd checked prices and times. More than that, he'd sent an email that morning to his manager saying he wanted to apply for the design position in the Mumbai office. It would take time, maybe a few months. But he was doing it. He was taking that risk. Mira's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have outshone the sun. She squeezed his hand tightly and said she'd help him with the transition. She knew people in the Mumbai office. She could make introductions, help him navigate the internal application process. They were in this together now. Then she laughed and made a joke about how people say one bed is enough, but only if it's the right person you're sharing it with. Arjun laughed too, pulling her close for a quick hug that lasted longer than professional colleagues should hug. 3 months later, Arjun moved to Mumbai. The design position came through faster than expected, helped by a glowing recommendation from someone in Mira's network. He found an apartment just 20 minutes from where Mira lived. Their relationship became office legend once people started putting the pieces together. When colleagues asked how they went from strangers to a couple so quickly, they'd exchange a knowing look and give the same answer. Sometimes chaos is just clarity wearing a different mask. Sometimes, the things that seem like problems are actually solutions. On their first anniversary, Arjun gave Mira a gift that made her laugh until tears ran down her face. It was a decorative throw pillow, professionally embroidered with the words, "One bed is enough," in elegant script. She loved it immediately. It lived on their couch as a permanent reminder of where they'd started. Friends who visited their apartment would ask about the strange pillow, and Mira and Arjun would smile and say it was an inside joke. They never told the full story to anyone except their closest friends, and even then, they left out some details. Sometimes late at night, when they were lying in bed in their shared apartment, they'd talk about that first night, how terrifying and awkward and completely absurd it had been, how neither of them could have predicted what would come from such a disaster. Mira would tease him about how seriously he'd taken that pillow barrier, and Arjun would remind her that she'd knocked it down anyway. They'd laugh together in the darkness, grateful for computer errors and overbookings, and all the small accidents that bring people together. The best love stories don't always start with love at first sight. Sometimes they start with exhaustion and confusion, and a woman walking into the wrong room at midnight. Sometimes they start with two strangers reluctantly sharing a space, and slowly discovering they don't want separate spaces anymore. Sometimes being half asleep is exactly what you need to wake up to the truth you've been missing. And sometimes, one bed really is enough, as long as it's the right person lying next to you.